Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we try to make sense of it all, pulling together threads from, well, everywhere, science, politics, global conflicts, to give you the insights that matter.
That's the mission, yeah. We're digging through a ton of sources today, from the subatomic level right up to geopolitics, trying to connect those dots for you.
And there's a lot to connect. We're looking at incredible science breakthroughs, decoding DNA, questioning physics itself, but also major international friction in Ukraine, the Middle East, Asia.
Plus some surprising stuff happening domestically in the U.S. and big shifts or maybe blocked shifts in climate policy. It's a lot.
It really is. It feels like a theme today might be about rules. Are they fixed? Are they changing? Whether we're talking physics or politics or even our own bodies.
That's a great way to frame it.
So let's jump right in. Highest priority first. Science. Some really fundamental stuff happening starting right inside us with our own genetic code.
Right. Let's talk genomics. There's this really significant new tool developed by researchers at EMBL, the European Molecular Biology Laboratory. It's called SDR-seq.
SDR-seq. Okay, what's the acronym stand for?
It's simultaneous decoding of RNA and DNA, and the key part is simultaneous and from individual cells. This is genuinely a leap forward.
Okay, so for years, when we talked about the genome, we mostly meant, what, the 1 or 2% that actually codes for proteins, right? The genes themselves.
Exactly. That's the bit scientists could track relatively easily, watching the DNA get transcribed into RNA, which is the messenger molecule that carries the instructions.
But that leaves like 98 or 99% of the genome. The stuff people used to call junk DNA.
Right, or the dark matter of the genome. We knew it wasn't really junk, that it was involved in regulating when and where genes get turned on or off. But figuring out how was incredibly difficult.
Why was it so hard to see what was going on there?
Well, think about it. You need to see the specific DNA sequence in that regulatory region, and you need to see the RNA it's producing, or maybe influencing, right there in the same single cell.
Ah, okay. And previous methods couldn't do both at once.
Not really, not effectively at the single cell level. You'd usually have to process DNA and RNA separately, so you might get an average picture across thousands of cells, but you'd lose the crucial detail of what's happening in one specific cell. It blurred everything out.
So you couldn't connect a specific DNA variation in a non-coding bit to its actual effect on RNA in that same cell.
Precisely. The context was lost. SDR-seq overcomes that. It lets researchers capture and read both the DNA sequence and the RNA molecules from the very same cell simultaneously.
Okay, that sounds technically impressive, but why is it so significant? What does this unlock?
It's huge because research increasingly shows that most of the genetic variations linked to complex diseases, think certain cancers, Alzheimer's, heart disease, lots of hereditary conditions, they don't actually sit in the protein-coding genes themselves.
They're in the dark matter, the
Yeah.
regulatory parts.
Exactly. They're in those vast non-coding regions. But until now, it was hard to understand what those variants were actually doing functionally. SDR-seq lets us see that directly. We can now analyze these disease-associated variants in their functional context.
So you can see, like, okay, this specific variation in this non-coding region in your liver cell seems to be messing up the regulation of that nearby gene.
That's the idea. It provides unprecedented access to understanding how these variations actually contribute to disease at a cellular level.
Which has massive implications for personalized medicine, right?
Absolutely. If we can pinpoint the exact mechanisms like that, we can develop much more targeted diagnostics and potentially, down the line, therapies designed to correct those specific regulatory problems based on your unique genome. It's a big step towards truly personalized treatments.
Wow. Okay, so we're rewriting the rules of understanding our own biology. Now, you mentioned something even more fundamental. Questioning the laws of the universe.
Yeah, this one's a bit mind-bending. There's a growing, though still provocative, perspective in cosmology suggesting that the fundamental laws of physics, things like gravity, electromagnetism, the speed of light, might not be absolutely fixed and constant throughout all of cosmic history.
Hang on. I thought that was, like, the bedrock of science. That these laws are immutable, the same everywhere, always.
That's certainly the traditional view, the one that comes down from Newton and Einstein. It's deeply ingrained. But this alternative idea suggests the universe isn't just a passive stage where fixed laws play out.
But an active participant, that somehow adjusts its own rules.
Sort of, yeah. The theory suggests the universe might bend the laws of physics over vast stretches of time, Maybe the rules themselves evolve.
Okay, is there any actual evidence for this, or is it just philosophical speculation?
There's some observational evidence cited, though it's debated. For instance, studies looking at light from extremely distant quasars, which means looking way back in time, have suggested that the fine structure constant might have been slightly different billions of years ago.
The fine structure constant that governs the strength of electromagnetism.
Right. That's the one. If that constant varied, even slightly, it implies the fundamental rules of interaction weren't quite the same back then.
And how does the evolution idea come into it?
Well, theoretical physicists like Lee Smolin have proposed models where physical laws could evolve, almost like natural selection. Maybe universes where the laws favor stability or the production of black holes are more successful and replicate in a cosmic sense.
That sounds wild, like there's a higher order meta-regulation governing the laws themselves.
It's definitely out there.
Yeah.
And it raises profound questions. If the laws aren't fixed, how reliable are our current models of the universe's history and future?
What do the traditionalists say?
They push back hard, of course. They argue that the observations suggesting variations in constants are likely due to measurement errors or maybe local environmental effects, not a change in the fundamental laws themselves. They maintain that the laws must be intrinsic and unchanging.
It's a fascinating debate. Feels like it touches on the very nature of reality. Okay, let's come back closer to home, but still in space. Some big milestones there, too.
Definitely. SpaceX just hit a remarkable number. They launched their 10,000th Starlink satellite.
10,000, that's a lot of satellites.
It really is. It underlines their massive push for global high-speed internet, trying to reach places that traditional infrastructure can't. But, it also brings up all the issues around orbital crowding, space debris, and the dominance of private companies in near-Earth space.
Yeah, we're definitely rewriting the rules of our orbital environment, even if the universe's rules are still up for debate.
And while private space hits these huge milestones, we're seeing earthly politics interfere with international science.
I talked about the International Space Station, the ISS.
Yeah. We got these absolutely stunning photos of the aurora taken by a Japanese astronaut up there recently. Just beautiful. A reminder of the wonders they see.
But the actual science updates stalled.
Stalled because of the ongoing U.S. government shutdown.
Ah, right. When the government shuts down, funding stops, and federal employees get furloughed. That includes people at NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
Exactly. Many of the scientists, engineers, and ground control staff who support the ISS operations, process the data, coordinate the experiments, they're not working.
So the astronauts are out there doing the work, but the support system on the ground is partially offline.
That's the situation. It slows down the dissemination of results, delays analysis, potentially impacts ongoing experiments. It just shows how fragile these big international science collaborations can be when faced with domestic political issues in one partner country.
It's frustrating. Billions spent on the station, and then it gets hampered by budget fights.
It really highlights that friction between scientific progress and political reality.
Well, amidst the uncertainty, there's at least one predictable celestial event coming up for people to enjoy.
Yes, a nice little treat for early risers. On October 19th, just before dawn, the moon and Venus are going to appear quite close together in the sky. A lovely morning stroll for them.
Something reliable to look up at. Good. Okay, let's move from space back down to Earth and tackle technology specifically, the darker side, deepfakes.
Yeah, this is becoming a really serious issue, especially in politics. There was a quite alarming incident recently where Senate Republicans posted a deepfake video of the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, on X, the platform that used to be Twitter.
And deepfake technology.
Right.
It uses AI, artificial intelligence, to create these incredibly realistic fake videos or audio clips, right?
That's right. It often uses something called generative adversarial networks, or GENs. You basically have two AIs, one trying to create the fake and the other trying to spot it. They train each other, getting better and better until the fake is almost undetectable to the human eye or ear.
So you can make it look like someone said or did something they never actually did.
Precisely. And putting a fake video of a prominent politician like Schumer online, that's playing with fire.
Especially since platforms like X have policies against manipulated media that's meant to deceive people. Do they take it down?
Well, that's the troubling part. The video reportedly stayed up for quite a while, despite those policies. It really highlights the enforcement gap.
An ethical dilemma becoming a practical regulatory nightmare.
Totally. The tech to create convincing fakes is advancing way faster than the ability or maybe the willingness of platforms to effectively police it. especially when the content is politically charged.
And the implications for, say, elections are huge.
Profound. If voters can't trust video evidence, if any damaging clip can just be dismissed as a potential deepfake, whether it's real or not, it corrodes the very basis of shared reality needed for democracy. We desperately need better public media literacy and probably stronger rules around this stuff.
It's a tough one. How do you regulate something that's evolving so quickly and can be weaponized so easily? A big question. Okay, shifting gears within tech, let's talk about something constructive. New materials.
Yes, some really cool work in material science. Researchers have developed these 3D printed metamaterials, kind of kagome tubes.
Kagome tubes. I think I read about this. Inspired by a Japanese weaving pattern.
That's right, kagome lattice structure. And what's fascinating is that their special properties don't come from the chemical makeup of the material, but from its geometric design.
So it's not about inventing a new super strong alloy. It's about how you shape a perhaps ordinary material.
Exactly. Metamaterials are all about structure. Imagine this intricate, repeating 3D pattern, kind of like a mesh made of hollow struts, forming hexagons and triangles.
Okay, I can visualize that.
Yeah.
So how does that shape help with something like vibration control, which I gather is the main application here?
Right. When vibrations, which are basically waves of energy, hit this specific kagome lattice structure, the geometry itself interacts with those waves. It channels, absorbs, and blocks the vibrational energy in very specific ways.
So it's not just about being stiff and resisting the force. It's more like actively managing the energy flow through its structure.
Precisely. It's like creating an acoustic or elastic filter. By tuning the geometry, they can create band gaps ranges of frequencies that simply can't propagate through the material, so it can effectively block certain vibrations or sounds.
That sounds incredibly useful. Where would you use this?
Obvious places are aerospace think engine mounts, airframes, places that experience constant, intense vibration. Reducing that vibration could improve structural integrity, lifespan, maybe even passenger comfort.
Or buildings, bridges, sensitive equipment.
Yeah, construction is another big potential area. Dampening vibrations could make structures last longer or protect delicate instruments.
That's the catch. Or the next hurdle.
The main challenge, as the researchers point out, is the classic engineering trade-off, balancing strength and weight. The geometric structure needs to be robust enough to carry loads without collapsing, but for things like aircraft, it also needs to be as lightweight as possible. Optimizing that balance for real-world applications is the next step.
Fascinating. Engineering solutions inspired by ancient patterns. Okay, we've gone from evolving universal laws to engineered vibration damping. Let's pivot now to the messy, unpredictable world of geopolitics and global conflict.
And Ukraine remains a central focus here, particularly highlighted by a reportedly difficult meeting at the White House between President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Right. Zelensky went there with a specific ask, didn't he?
Yeah.
Something significant.
He did. He was pushing for Tomahawk cruise missiles. These are long-range, precision weapons that could allow Ukraine to strike high-value Russian targets far behind the current front lines, command centers, ammo depots, logistics hubs.
A major escalation in capability. How did President Trump respond?
According to reports, with hesitation, no firm commitment was made. Trump apparently raised two main concerns.
Which were?
First, the risk of provoking a massive escalation from Russia, giving Ukraine weapons that could strike deep into Russian-controlled territory, or potentially Russia itself, crosses a line that he seemed wary of.
And the second concern?
Conserving U.S. stockpiles. He reportedly emphasized the need to maintain America's own military readiness and reserves, suggesting that sending large numbers of sophisticated missiles like Tomahawks could deplete supplies needed for other potential contingencies.
That really sets up the diplomatic challenge, doesn't it? Trump has often spoken about wanting to mediate, to broker a deal between Russia and Ukraine.
Right. He positions himself as someone who could potentially sit down with Russian President Vladimir Putin and negotiate an end to the conflict.
But Zelensky's position is quite different. He was very open about his feelings towards Putin in that meeting, wasn't he?
Extremely clear. He reportedly stated his hatred for Putin, calling it a rational response to someone trying to destroy his country. It underscores the immense emotional and political chasm.
How do you mediate between someone who wants to negotiate and someone who feels they're fighting an existential enemy driven by hatred? It seems almost impossible.
It's an incredibly difficult tightrope. And then adding another layer of complexity, or perhaps absurdity, you get these counterproposals from the Russian side.
Like what?
Well, there was this extraordinary suggestion floated by a Russian official, the idea of a Putin-Trump unity tunnel
A tunnel. Where?
under the Bering Strait, a 70-mile rail tunnel physically connecting Russia and the United States, specifically Alaska.
You're kidding. While a major war is happening in Europe, they're proposing a multi-billion-dollar tunnel between the U.S. and Russia.
That's the proposal. The official cost estimate mentioned was around $65 billion, though interestingly, they also suggested that using technology from Elon Musk's Boring company could potentially lower that cost.
Slight chuckle. Okay, is anyone taking this seriously, or is it just a massive distraction?
I think most observers see it primarily as political theater. It shifts the narrative away from the war, frames Russia and the U.S. as potential partners in grand future projects, and appeals directly to a U.S. president known for liking big infrastructure deals. It tries to sideline Ukraine's immediate needs entirely.
A $65 billion distraction. Wow. Speaking of strange geopolitical twist, what's happening with the Nord Stream pipeline investigation? The pipelines that were sabotaged under the Baltic Sea.
Right. German investigators identified a Ukrainian national, Vladimir Zhuravlyov, as a key suspect they wanted to question.
But he's in Poland, and Poland refused to extradite him.
Correct. A Polish judge blocked the extradition request. And the reasoning given is really fascinating from a legal and political perspective.
Oh, so?
Two main points. First, the judge essentially framed Zhuravlyov's alleged actions not as terrorism or criminal sabotage, but as potentially rational military conduct, given the context of the war between Ukraine and Russia.
So, arguing that damaging enemy infrastructure, even civilian infrastructure used by the enemy, could be seen as a legitimate act of war.
That seems to be the implication, viewing it through the lens of conflict rather than international crime. Second, the judge questioned Germany's jurisdiction, noting the explosions occurred in international waters, not German territory.
That Polish position aligns pretty strongly with their overall support for Ukraine, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It creates a direct clash with Germany's pursuit of the case and highlights how interpretations of international law can be heavily influenced by national interests and alliances, especially during wartime. The same act viewed very differently.
The malleability of rules again. Okay, let's shift focus southward to U.S. operations near Venezuela. President Trump confirmed some controversial actions there.
He did. He confirmed reports about CIA operatives being present inside Venezuela and also confirmed the U.S. military had destroyed what he termed a narco-submarine in the Caribbean Sea.
This is part of a broader anti-drug trafficking effort. Trump has been very vocal about Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's government.
Extremely vocal, yes. He's accused Maduro of effectively running a narco state. These actions represent a significant escalation in direct U.S. intervention in the region aimed at disrupting drug flows.
But there was a specific claim he made about the impact of these operations that drew a lot of criticism, right?
Yes, the claim about lives saved. President Trump asserted that 5 recent strikes against suspected drug smuggling boats had saved at least 100,000 American lives. He even broke it down, suggesting 25,000 lives saved per boat.
25,000 lives per boat. How did analysts react to that number?
With considerable skepticism. Drug policy experts immediately questioned the basis for that calculation. First, they pointed out that no evidence was presented linking those specific vessels to drug shipments of a quantity or type that would predictably lead to 25,000 deaths in the U.S.
And the second point?
That Venezuela, while certainly a transit point, isn't considered the primary source or route for the majority of illicit drugs entering the U.S. Compared to trafficking through Central America and Mexico, its role is generally seen as smaller. So the scale of the impact claimed seemed disproportionate.
It raises serious questions about the evidence behind such stark claims, especially when they're used to justify military actions.
Definitely. And that leads straight into the legal and ethical scrutiny. Human rights organizations raise concerns that these strikes, potentially conducted without due process against individuals not formally charged with a crime, could constitute extrajudicial killings under international law.
Is the legal justification based on classifying cartels as terrorist organizations?
That seems to be part of the administration's controversial legal framework. Classifying cartels as terrorists could, in their view, authorize military force. But critics see this as a dangerous and legally dubious expansion of executive power to conduct targeted killings abroad against non-state actors involved primarily in criminal enterprises, not necessarily political terrorism as traditionally defined.
A very complex legal and moral gray area. Okay. Moving across the globe to Africa, instability in Madagascar.
Yes, a coup d'etat there. Colonel Michael Randrianirina has taken power after ousting the elected president, Andry Rajoelina.
What prompted the coup?
It seems to have been triggered by widespread public anger and protests over severe ongoing shortages of basic necessities, particularly electricity and clean water. These failures fueled frustration with the Rajoelina government, creating an opening for the military.
And the new military leader is promising change.
As they often do. Colonel Randrianirina promised profound change. But history shows us the typical putschist playbook often involves consolidating military control first and indefinitely postponing any promised return to democratic elections. We'll have to watch closely to see if Madagascar follows that pattern.
Right. Promises are easy after a coup. Elsewhere in Africa, a significant legal development regarding Sudan.
Yes, a major verdict from a U.S. court. A federal jury in New York found the large French bank, BNP Paribas, liable for complicity in atrocities committed in Sudan under the regime of former dictator Omar al-Bashir.
Complicit? How is the bank involved? They weren't committing the atrocities themselves.
No, but the plaintiffs argued successfully that by knowingly providing essential financial services to Bashir's regime, allowing them to bypass sanctions and move money internationally, BNP Paribas essentially enabled the government to fund its military and security forces, which were carrying out genocide, torture, and other abuses.
So facilitating the regime's finances equated to complicity in its crimes.
That was the jury's finding. They awarded $20.75 million in damages to the plaintiffs, who were victims of torture or lost family members during that period.
That feels like a landmark ruling.
It really is. It sets a potentially powerful precedent for holding major financial institutions accountable for facilitating human rights abuses by regimes they do business with. Even if the banking activities themselves were technically legal elsewhere, BNP Paribas says it will appeal, but it sends a strong signal.
Accountability reaching the financial enablers. Finally, let's touch on the incredibly tense situation in Gaza. Any recent developments there?
It remains extremely fragile. There was a poignant moment, the reopening of the historic Said al-Hashim Mosque in Gaza City after being closed for 2 years due to previous conflicts, a symbol of resilience, perhaps.
But that symbolic hope is contrasted with ongoing tragedy.
Yes. The grim news continued with the confirmation of another hostage death. The body of Eliyahu Margalit was recovered and identified, a painful reminder of those still held or unaccounted for.
And the ceasefire truce, is it holding?
It seems incredibly shaky. There are persistent reports of breaches. One particularly tragic incident involved reports of an Israeli strike killing multiple members of a single Palestinian family.
How did the Israeli military respond to those reports?
The Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, stated they had targeted a vehicle that crossed agreed-upon ceasefire lines and posed what they assessed as an immediate threat. These kinds of disputed incidents just highlight how volatile the situation is. A single clash, a single perceived violation could shatter the truce entirely.
A very precarious situation indeed. Okay, let's shift now to the global economy, climate policy, and some domestic U.S. political threads.
On the economic front, we saw some market optimism recently. The Dow Jones Industrial Average jumped about 300 points.
What was driving that positive sentiment?
Primarily two things, it seems. Firstly, some easing of concerns about bank credit availability fears of a wider credit crunch seem to have receded slightly. Secondly, maybe some perceived lessening of trade tensions, particularly involving China.
But is that optimism solid? Are there underlying worries?
There are definitely still caution flags. While the big indexes went up, analysts point to continued signs of stress or potential instability within smaller regional banks in the U.S. So it's a bit of a mixed picture, short-term relief versus potential longer-term structural issues.
Okay. Now, a potentially huge development in climate policy from China.
Yes, this could be really significant. China, currently the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases by a considerable margin, has made its first ever commitment to achieve an overall reduction in its total emissions.
First ever overall reduction pledge, not just slowing the growth, but actually cutting total emissions.
That's the pledge. It marks a potential turning point. For years, China's focus was on carbon intensity, reducing emissions per unit of economic output, which still allowed total emissions to rise as their economy grew rapidly. This signals a shift towards an absolute cap and reduction.
That's massive given their scale. What happens now?
The crucial next step is seeing the details. What are the specific targets? What's the timeline? How exactly do they plan to restructure their energy system, moving away from coal? But the pledge itself is a major political signal on the global stage.
A potential positive shift. Contrast that with some concerning news from Europe, specifically France.
Right. The credit rating agency S&P Global downgraded France's long-term sovereign debt rating, knocking it down a notch from AA to A+ alt.
Why the downgrade? What are the concerns?
S&P cited rising government debt levels. They project French debt will climb to about 121% of its gross domestic product, GDP, by 2028, which is very high. They also pointed to ongoing political instability.
Linked to the pension reform.
Directly linked, yes.
Yeah.
Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu's government has faced huge protests and parliamentary opposition over its push to raise the retirement age. They survived 2 very narrow no-confidence votes recently, highlighting the political fragility.
What does a credit downgrade actually mean for France?
It can increase the government's borrowing costs. Investors might demand higher interest rates to lend money to a country perceived as slightly riskier, making it harder and more expensive to manage that already large debt load. It puts more pressure on the finance minister to control spending and meet EU deficit targets.
Okay, so domestic political battles impacting international financial standing. Now, let's look at climate policy on an international scale specifically. The shipping industry. A setback there.
A significant one, yes. The International Maritime Organization, the IMO, which is the UN body regulating global shipping, effectively shelved its proposed net zero shipping framework. They delayed further discussion for at least 12 months.
That sounds bad. Shipping is a huge source of emissions, isn't it?
It is. The global shipping fleet accounts for nearly 3% of all human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. And since about 80% of global trade moves by sea, decarbonizing shipping is absolutely essential to meet overall climate goals. This delay is a big blow.
Why the delay? What was the sticking point?
The core disagreement was over a proposed carbon pricing mechanism. Essentially, a way to make emitting carbon more expensive for shipping companies, thereby incentivizing cleaner fuels and technologies.
And who opposed that?
Major economies, including reportedly the United States under President Trump's administration, pushed back hard. The concern was that this mechanism would act like a global carbon tax on shipping, which would inevitably drive up the cost of transporting goods worldwide, potentially fueling inflation.
I heard the vote to delay was quite close, something like 57 to 49 against moving forward immediately.
That's right. It was contentious. Reports suggested President Trump actively lobbied against the framework, even threatening potential sanctions against countries supporting it, calling it a global Green New Scam tax. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, expressed deep disappointment, calling it a missed opportunity.
So national economic concerns trumped global climate action in this case.
It appears so, for now. Meanwhile, the physical impacts of climate change are undeniable. We're seeing things like the unprecedented North Pacific mystery heatwave ocean temperatures far above normal, disrupting marine life and weather patterns.
And the real human cost, like in Alaska.
Exactly. The damage from recent severe storms there has been so extensive that officials are saying many evacuated residents might not be able to return to their homes for 18 months or more. Whole communities face long-term displacement because infrastructure was simply overwhelmed or destroyed. It's a stark reminder of the need for adaptation and resilience.
Absolutely. Okay, let's turn to some domestic U.S. political developments, focusing on President Trump's actions and legal battles. First, a controversial use of clemency power.
Yes, President Trump commuted the prison sentence of George Santos, the former congressman who had been convicted of fraud and identity theft.
Commuted after how long? Santos received a fairly lengthy sentence initially, didn't he?
He was sentenced to 7 years, but President Trump commuted it after Santos had served only about 3 months.
3 months out of 7 years. That's a significant reduction. What was the justification given?
President Trump cited what he called Santos's horrible mistreatment in prison, including time allegedly spent in solitary confinement. He argued the punishment already served was sufficient, even while acknowledging Santos was a rogue.
How did that play out politically?
It immediately sparked criticism about the appearance of favoritism towards a political figure, albeit a disgraced one. Critics argued it undermined the judicial process and raised questions about whether accountability applies equally or if political connections influence outcomes. It fits into a larger debate about the use of presidential pardon and commutation powers.
Right. Another area of tension involves federal versus state authority. President Trump is pushing the Supreme Court on deploying the National Guard.
Yes, he's urging the Supreme Court to intervene and essentially grant the federal government the authority to deploy National Guard troops to the Chicago area to address crime, potentially against the wishes of the state government.
This is a direct challenge to the governor of Illinois.
It is. Governor J.B. Pritzker strongly condemned the idea, calling it an un-American and politically motivated attempt to militarize local law enforcement. It highlights that fundamental constitutional tension over where federal power ends and state sovereignty begins, especially regarding domestic policing.
A major power struggle, potentially hitting to the highest court. And lastly, a note on policy continuity, something from the previous administration being kept.
Yeah, it's interesting. Despite many regulatory changes, the U.S. Department of Energy, or DOE, decided to maintain a large loan guarantee program that was actually established under the Biden administration.
Which program is this?
It's a $1.6 billion loan guarantee specifically for American Electric Power, or AEP.
AEP, one of the big utility companies.
Exactly. They're one of the largest electric utilities in the U.S. The loan guarantee is aimed at helping them finance major upgrades to the power grid, things like improving resilience against extreme weather, increasing capacity, and integrating more renewable energy sources.
So even with a change in administration, some large-scale practical infrastructure initiatives carry over.
It seems so. The need for a stable, modern, and resilient power grid is pretty fundamental, regardless of political affiliation. So, on certain critical infrastructure projects like this, you sometimes see policy continuity across administrations.
Makes sense. Okay, let's round out our deep dive today with some developments in health and societal trends that are directly relevant for, well, all of us.
Absolutely. We started with genomics. Let's circle back to diagnostics with something called the Gallery test.
The Gallery test, I've heard about this. It's a blood test for cancer detection.
That's right, but what makes it revolutionary is its potential scope. It's designed to detect signals of more than 50 different types of cancer from a single blood draw.
50 types. How does it do that?
It looks for tiny fragments of DNA that tumors shed into the bloodstream. This is called cell-free DNA, or cfDNA. Different cancers can have different patterns or mutations in this cfDNA, and the test uses sophisticated analysis to identify those signals.
That's a huge departure from current screening, which is often one test for one cancer, like a mammogram or a colonoscopy, and many cancers have no routine screening at all.
Exactly. The potential here is for much earlier detection across a wider range of cancers, including some that are typically diagnosed late when they're harder to treat. Earlier detection generally leads to better outcomes, so this could be a game changer if it proves reliable and accessible.
A big if, but definitely hopeful. Now, something completely unexpected, a link between weight loss drugs and alcohol consumption.
Yeah, this is fascinating research. It involves drugs like Ozempic. The active ingredient is semaglutide. These are GLP-1 receptor agonists.
Right, they became famous for weight loss, but were originally for diabetes. How do they connect to alcohol?
Well, their primary job is regulating blood sugar and appetite by mimicking a gut hormone. But it turns out GLP-1 receptors are also found in the brain's reward pathways.
The same pathways involved in addiction.
Precisely. Studies, including some anecdotal reports and now more formal research, suggest that people taking these drugs not only feel less desire to drink alcohol, but may also experience reduced cravings and find they drink less overall when they do drink.
So a drug designed for metabolism might have a side benefit for treating alcohol use disorder, or AUD.
It's looking like a real possibility. It could offer a completely new angle for treatment, targeting those reward circuits indirectly through this hormonal pathway, rather than directly targeting brain chemistry like some existing AUD medications. More research is needed, but it's a very promising lead.
Wow. Serendipity in pharmacology. Now, a more philosophical but deeply human topic. Terminal lucidity.
Yes, this is that phenomenon observed sometimes in people who are very near death, particularly those who have experienced severe cognitive decline due to conditions like Alzheimer's disease or dementia or even delirium.
They suddenly become clear-headed again, just before the end.
For a brief period, yes. They might suddenly recognize family members they haven't recognized in years, speak clearly, express emotions, share memories, offer apologies or final words of love. It can be incredibly profound for the families witnessing it.
It sounds almost mystical. Do we have any scientific understanding of what's happening in the brain?
It's still largely a mystery. Some neuroscientists speculate it could involve a temporary surge in specific brain activity, maybe high-frequency gamma waves related to consciousness and memory retrieval, occurring as overall brain systems are shutting down. But honestly, we don't really know. It's a powerful, unexplained human experience.
A moment of clarity at the very end. On a related note, you mentioned a study about calcium supplements.
Yes, just a quick clarification point. A long-term Australian study recently provided strong evidence debunking the persistent myth that taking calcium supplements increases the risk of dementia in older women. Good news for those who need calcium for bone health.
Good to clear that up. Okay, let's turn to some pressing public health crises and community issues. Measles outbreaks.
Unfortunately, yes. We're seeing a resurgence in certain areas, like the U.S. upstate region, and the primary driver seems to be declining childhood vaccination rates.
Fueled by vaccine hesitancy or exemptions.
It seems largely linked to lower uptake, sometimes exacerbated by religious or personal belief exemptions allowed in some school districts. We saw one significant quarantine event in South Carolina where 139 unvaccinated students had to be kept home after a potential exposure.
And measles is incredibly contagious.
One of the most contagious viruses known. When vaccination rates drop below the threshold needed for herd immunity, usually around 95%, you create vulnerability for outbreaks that can spread rapidly, especially threatening infants too young to be vaccinated or people with compromised immune systems.
A preventable disease making a comeback due to social factors. Now, an ethical crisis unfolding in South Africa regarding healthcare access.
Yes, this is deeply concerning. Reports indicate that anti-migrant groups have been actively trying to block foreign nationals from accessing public health clinics in some areas.
Blocking them physically.
Wow.
On what grounds?
Their stated argument is one of resource scarcity. They claim South Africa's public health system is overstretched and that limited resources, doctor's time, medicine beds, should be prioritized exclusively for South African citizens.
But that raises huge ethical flags.
Yeah.
Right. Denying healthcare based on nationality.
Absolutely. Human rights groups and health organizations condemn it as xenophobic and a violation of the fundamental right to health. They argue it not only harms vulnerable migrants, but also potentially fuels public health risks if infectious diseases aren't treated, regardless of a person's origin. It's a very tense situation.
A really difficult clash between nationalism and universal health principles. On a more positive community health note, something good happening in Colombia.
Yes, a celebration in Quibdó, a city in a region with a large Afro-descendant population. They inaugurated the first formal midwifery house with support from the International Labor Organization, or ILO.
Why is a formal midwifery house so important there?
Two main reasons. Firstly, the region has historically suffered from high rates of maternal and infant mortality. Secondly, traditional midwives, often Afro-descendant or indigenous women, have been providing essential care for generations but have largely been invisible in the formal health system.
So they lack recognition, training, support.
Often, yes. They might lack formal training, compensation, or social protections. This new midwifery house aims to change that. It will provide a space for training, workshops on reproductive health, and crucially, give these midwives formal recognition and integrate them better with the broader health system, aiming to improve care and outcomes for mothers and babies.
Recognizing and supporting vital community caregivers. That's great to hear. Wow. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today.
We really have. From decoding the 98% of our genome we used to ignore, to debating whether the laws of physics themselves are constant.
To the complexities of supplying weapons in wartime, the ethics of drone strikes, the fragility of ceasefires, the politics of climate finance.
And right down to community health battles and breakthroughs. It's a complex world.
It certainly is. And that complexity underlines the need for critical thinking, doesn't it? We heard President Trump's specific claims about lives saved by military strikes, immediately followed by experts saying, where's the evidence?
Exactly. Or seeing deepfake videos deployed in political campaigns, apparently testing the limits of platform enforcement. You, as the listener, constantly have to ask, what's the source? What's the evidence? What's the agenda behind this narrative?
Yeah, and we see these contrasts everywhere. Huge international bodies like the IMO get bogged down for a year trying to agree on something like carbon pricing for ship because powerful nations resist.
While a single massive nation like China takes a potentially game-changing step on its own by pledging overall emission cuts for the first time.
And at the same time, down in the lab, scientists are literally engineering materials using geometry to block physical forces like vibration.
Which leaves us with that final thought to chew on. Where does real transformative change come from faster? Is it through the slow, often frustrating process of global consensus building and international agreements?
Or is it driven more effectively by bold, perhaps unilateral national policy shifts, coupled with the relentless disruptive power of scientific and technological innovation that just bypasses the old problems? Something for you to explore.
Indeed. A question for our times.
That's our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon to keep connecting the dots.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.